What's up, guys? This is Rey-Jay back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with SPY, Tesla, and the broader markets. I'm going to break down some big news that came out involving President Trump that could be affecting the way the market's moving. What's happening with the economic calendars? We have some important data coming out and how this may affect things moving forward. Just know that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I'm saying as financial advice whatsoever. Anyways, when you look at SPY, one could argue there's a possibility of a left shoulder, a head, and then a right shoulder forming an inverse head and shoulders. But we need to see this basically hold above 636 to start trying to push higher. And as of right now, SPY is not really doing that. In fact, we're looking a bit more choppy. Now, we could try to go a little higher. I could see that as a possibility, but then I do anticipate there's going to be a lot of chop. Typically, when we approach FOMC, there's going to be lots of chop before we try to either push up or down, depending on what Jerome Powell says. So we'll see how it ends up going. Now, in the morning, we got some GDP numbers. The GDP growth rate was at 3%. This is technically above expectations. The GDP price index was also at 2% below expectations. And everything else was decent. Even GDP sales were up, beating expectations. So decent GDP numbers, which is parts of why SPY is a little bit green in the pre-markets. And that is decent for the markets. However, as we approach FOMC, like I said before, we're typically chop. There's going to be a lot of chop, a lot of sideways price action. And then starting at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, that's when there's going to be more volatility. And during the press conference, there could be a massive move depending on what Jerome Powell says. So we'll see how it ends up going. Right now, there's a 97.9% chance the Fed is going to keep rates the same. So we do expect that. But we're going to have to see how things end up going, at least moving forward. So we basically had President Trump saying some very, very important things that I just wanted to talk about. First and foremost, President Trump was talking about how he's not going to be extending the tariff pause past August 1st. He's going to be very, very stern about that date. So he said that the August 1st deadline is the August 1st deadline. It stands strong and it will not be extended. A big day for America. That's what President Trump is saying. So this is a reminder that in just 2 days from now, we have a very, very important date coming up. That's when President Trump is going to be once again increasing the tariffs on the majority of countries, especially for the countries that don't have deals. And with more tariffs being imposed, this could be affecting, trade between different countries and a lot of different factors. So you want to be ready just to be safe. So please keep that in mind. That's going to be some very, very important news. On top of this, President Trump also mentioned that, he was talking about India and he said that, remember, while India is our friend, we have over the years done relatively little business with them because their tariffs are far too high, among the highest in the world, and they have the most strenuous and obnoxious non-monetary trade barriers of any country. Also, they have always brought the majority of their military equipment from Russia, so he's not really happy about that. So he's basically saying that India will therefore be paying a tariff of 25% plus a penalty for the above starting on August 1st. That is going to be some big news that President Trump announced. So, one of the things that President Trump said is that there's going to be a 10% penalty for countries that are associated with the BRICS nations. So, that means that India is going to be hit with a 25% tariff, and there could be a possible additional 10% tariff because of the fact that they buy weapons from Russia. So that's some really, really big news, right? India is still a major trade partner. I know he's saying that we do relatively business with them. Yeah, it is true relative to like Canada and Mexico, but at the same time, we do hundreds of billions of dollars worth of trade with them, or close to $100 billion worth of trade, and that's still a big trading partner. So that's why it's going to be affecting the cost of goods when it comes to textile, agricultural products, and etc. So keep that in mind. That's still some very, very important news. And then President Trump could also be using this as a tactic to get the deal done faster, because when he threatens these high tariffs, whether it's 25% or even 30% if there's an additional penalty, that's going to incentivize India to make a deal with the US, maybe try to get things done with. They've been scrambling to make a deal, and we're going to see if something ends up happening. So keep that in mind. On top of this, President Trump just said that the second quarter GDP is out at 3%, way better than expected. Too late. Powell must lower the rates now, is what he's essentially saying. There's no inflation. Let the people buy and refinance their homes. So now President Trump is saying that we have a decent GDP rate, which he is correct about, at least so far. And then he's saying that Jerome Powell should lower interest rates, and that's where the big difference happens to be. As of right now, Jerome Powell is not going to do that. He's going to likely keep rates the same, and I believe President Trump is going to be very angry. So we'll see what that leads to. But then it also depends on what Jerome Powell says about the high inflation we just saw. How is he going to address that? So be ready for his speech at 2:30. We also have Meta and Microsoft announcing earnings after market close today, so be ready for some volatility. So, like I said before, guys, FOMC days are boring for the first half, and then the second half is when things get interesting. We're not really expecting too much. We're going to have to see what is said and done by the Fed. And we're going to see a lot of chop today in the markets. So just wanted to give you guys a heads up about that. So don't be surprised if the market's just very, very boring. And you want to be very careful because when the market chops around, that could really hurt a lot of the option holder premiums. So if you guys are like trading options, for example, that could really affect the way in which, things end up trading. So keep that in mind. So what do I think is going to happen? I would not be surprised if we kind of like consolidate, maybe try to go for like the 636s. It's possible we try to go a little higher. But for the most part, I think we're just going to consolidate like this. If we lose 634.4, we're looking for a bigger decline. But if we hold above 636, we could go a little higher before we consolidate. Then we'll see if if Jerome Powell causes a big pump or dump depending on FOMC. So I could be looking for a move like this. There might be a little bit of upside and then some consolidation. We'll have to see how things go. Keep in mind the GDP numbers were decent, so that's a good sign. Now, one thing that is concerning though is that when you look at the QQQ, this also has a left shoulder, a head, and a right shoulder. And we need to get back above like 570 to turn a lot more bullish. If we reclaim 570, I could be looking for a push. If we can't do that and we reject, look for 566. If that doesn't hold, we could be dumping off this head and shoulders. Now, for now, I do think it might push a little higher and consolidate. Then Jerome Powell is going to launch this up or down. There is a bias for the downside looking at the setup, but we'll see just to be safe because with FOMC, you never know. For the IWM, we're looking a bit more bullish. We need to hold above 223.8. If that breaks, we're looking for the 224s. If we end up losing 223.5, we're looking for a dip back down. So hopefully we try to push higher for the 224s. We'll have to see how things go if we get a rejection or not. But overall, there is upside potential. For ES, we're currently making lower highs right here. When you zoom out, this also resembles a head and shoulders. So we have basically a left shoulder, a head, and kind of like a right shoulder that's slanted. Now we need to get back above 64.30 to push higher. If we don't, we're going to be favoring basically 63.80 or below for some downside. So we'll just have to see how this head and shoulders ends up going for ES. There's going to be that risk of downside in case this ends up failing. But I don't think we're just going to dump immediately. Like I said before, we're very choppy right now. We're going to likely chop around like this, and we'll see if we go up or down depending on FOMC. But there is a slant to head and shoulders, so be very careful with ES nonetheless. Same thing with NQ. We basically have a left shoulder. This is kind of like a head right over here. This could be like a right shoulder. Actually, I think that you could kind of redraw this. So this could be like the left shoulder over here. So I could kind of redraw this a little bit. So we'll see how that goes. But anyways, we're going to see if this leads to a rejection or not. It is possible that we sort of like chop around right over here. We could kind of like chop over here in the 23,500 range. And we'll see if we break up or down, but be careful as we still have a head and shoulders. So there's that downside risk. Bitcoin's making lower highs here. So we're going to see if we reclaim 118,000. If not, we may chop around, start dipping for 117,000 flats. For Tesla, I think that we're making higher lows. However, it's also very choppy. We're not really doing a whole lot. Might push a little bit higher. It's possible you try to go a bit higher for like 324, come back down, then just kind of chop around, and we'll see if we break up or down. We'll give this the time it needs just to see how things end up going. Nvidia is favoring upside. If we end up losing basically 175, we're looking for a dump. But so long as we hold this, we're looking for 178 as a potential target. Then a lot of chop right here. And we'll see if we break up or down. So give this the time it needs. For Appl, we're rejecting here. We might dip closer to like 209. Then we'll see if we bounce, but look for some downside. And we'll see what kind of reaction we get. But for now, the odds do favor the downwards direction. For AMD, we're making lower highs here. We could be dipping back down towards 174. And we'll see if we end up getting some kind of reaction here. So we're technically favoring 174, and we'll see if we bounce or not. So give this the time it needs. That's going to be very key for how we end up moving. For Coinbase, we're looking a bit more bullish. We're currently favoring 388. So we're going to see if we break through this or not. I do anticipate a test of basically the 200 EMA up here, and then we're going to see if we reject or not. But I favor some upside for 388, and we'll see how this goes. Amazon looks a little bit more decent. It might see 231, but I think it's going to chomp around. And I think what matters more is earnings. So expect some chop. We've been chopping for the last like day and a half. And then we're going to see if this bounces or not, depending on FOMC. So we're still range bound between 231 and 230. We'll see if we break up or down. So give this the time it needs. For Meta, we could be looking for basically a retest of 700. We're going to see if we bounce off that. If this is a higher low off this move, we could dip to the lower 700s, then bounce, slowly push higher, and then consolidate between these EMAs. And we'll see if we break up or down depending on earnings. Earnings is going to be causing some volatility likely. Google's consolidating between 197 or a little bit under that and basically 195. So I do expect it to continue to trade sideways until we see a directional shift. One of those directions has to break. Microsoft looks more bullish, favoring 515. We're going to see how it goes. The VIX is also kind of flat here. We're going to see if this goes higher or not. There's a gap to fill, so it still has some upside potential. So with that being said, guys, honestly, the market might try to go a little higher thanks to the GDP numbers, but then I do see a lot of chop coming. So be prepared for some upside. There might be a little bit of upside coming if this is an inverse head and shoulders on SPY. But then we might, once again, shop around like this, chop, chop, chop until we get the FOMC results. So until then, be prepared for some upside, then a lot of chop, and then we'll see what happens once we get to FOMC at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That being said, I thank you all so much for listening. Have a good rest of your guys' days, and peace out.